G'day, you ingrates. The truth's on the table. Down it all, or it'll be right into the cosmopolite with you. Last thing we saw was my dudes besieging the Frenchiest bit of France, noses firmly pegged closed. There was this other army outside the city, and if I could get them to look the other way for a sec, I could cash in my 5-finger discount on Paris without having to get all muskety up in their grills. There was only one man for the job, Sam, heroin hunter Tozzy the Tosspot. And by the grace of all the gods in the loony bin, he royally fucked it up to the tune of a firing squad. Not that they really needed to waste the bullets, he was probably already dead from the golden brown by the time they got him. In fact, I'm fairly sure he was dead when I hired him. Because of that mess up, I just left them all to it, went back to my bit of France, figured there'd be another sexually charged cheese market somewhere and they'd bugger their way over there without locking the door. Next up, I got myself just about the least fuck-off boat you could imagine to go explore La Mer de up there, the seas that rumour has it were swarming with French hull to cull. Found out that Sweden and the Duchy of the Dutch were having a trade tiff. Didn't really give a shit though, since they both openly thought that I was going a little hard on that Austria annexing, baguette bashing, cheese chafing, death dodging, escargot eating, feta fucking, garçon grabbing, hat heightening, intelligence impairing, Johnny jousting, king cludging, land lubbing, Marseille menacing, name nicking, Oz opposing, Prussia poaching, quiz questing, robot recruiting, snails lurping, tozzy topping, undercarriage undulating, Vienna vamping, worm wanking, Zebex anogamising, Yorkid yearning, zygotes zombifying, excuse for an emperor. Anyway, what was happening again? Oh, well, I guess the next thing I looked into was reports that a French army had just got back from R&R at a beach near Belgrade. R&R standing for recalibrate and repair, of course, since they were robots. Or maybe they were humans who just really liked a bit of the old oiled-up spanner treatment, who knows. Whatever the case, I had a whole bozo buffet ready to greet them. Went in for the kill, but the slippery spanner spooners made a break for it and slipped the net. Couldn't catch them again, but we got them trapped between a bunch of rivers. Luckily, these wrench witches couldn't pass over running water thanks to a curse they got from a municipal water authority that got mad over too much piss in the showers. That's right kids, it ain't just a ghost story, MWA's coming for ya. Point is, they were trapped, so that was that. After that, I decided that the Bavarian bring your own blunderbuss barbecue was probably over by now, so I went in for round 2. I managed to isolate 360 of their goonies outside the city and came at them with 8,000 rock-hard swords. I thought this should be absolutely fine. You fucking Queensland sludge-noshing piss stains, I'll rape your fucking eye sockets, you... Calm blue ocean, okay, let it pass. So, something happened, and then we all went on to very calmly and smoothly capture Bavaria for the glory of Napoleon I. Great. Now, next thing on my mind was the creeping feeling that some Frenchy fingers were crawling in for a little touch down my Marseille way. I didn't have much there to stop them. Luckily though, there just happened to be a bunch of one-way tickets out of Sardinia for a small batch of defective soldier-shaped biscuits so they could bring their misbaked forms over to help. Finally, at Paris, half the local stink generators had offed themselves just as I'd predicted, so I went in to think about a so sneaky it's cheeky siege. We had twice their men, but theirs were twice as good, so overall it was a fair setup. A little risky, but of course I wasn't going to miss a chance to steal the jewel from the tiny Nap's floppy hat, and with only Sardinian lives on the line, it seemed like I couldn't lose, so it was bang, whiz, slam, shiz time. Paris itself was a lot smaller than I thought it would be, that's for sure, and the Frenchies were less berserk than usual. Rather than running out crazily into our bullets, they walked calmly and confidently into our bullets. Almost disappointing really, but then again it's nice to have the time to be methodical when you're exterminating an evil empire. As well as my main attack from the south, I had a distractionary attack in the north, conducted by a bunch of my wedding attire Rambos. French took the bait and I started reeling them in towards the only house in the area with a working front door. I'd also brought some cav along for the ride, but they were rustled by some curious creeps peeping over my protective hill. You'll probably be astounded to learn that I dealt with that situation by killing them all. Had to be a tiny bit careful as they did have one of those spiky bastards nearby. The ones made out of a material that reflects a wavelength of light that guys riding horses are genetically unable to see. But we managed to dodge those immobile horse hunters, and my top-hatted quickscopers made good use of the fact that some weirdo had extended his house with a load of battlements to put some moisture into the enemy's pants. Back at the main battle, things were going as bangily as ever. Just made sure everyone was pulling their weight, since this was a big day that could change the course of history. I didn't want any journalists spotting the fact that most of my men were only carrying around cardboard musket props and were constantly turning towards the cameras to hide the fact they could only afford the front half of the uniform. I found out that some of my blokes were still getting into formation, not realising that the Frenchies were already standing where they needed to stand, and all too unfamiliar with the concept of initiative to do anything different. So I had to coddle them as usual, but luckily no more than half of them died from that mistake. So things continued as usual for a while, and things went pretty well actually, thanks for asking. People who I hated got shot on both sides, so that's all lovely. I made a Cav rear attack on the city and got intercepted by another gang of those square hat twats. I thought I'd give my men a chance against them, thinking maybe they'd grown up a little and would understand that the correlation between the existence of squares and the existence of the concept of death was not indicative of causation. Who am I pissing? They didn't even recognise the language of half the words I just used. They bolted out of there pronto, but I didn't really care since I had the enemy's arty kebabbed up. Some of the other RC up the road were still at large, but unless there'd been a lot of meteorites landing right in front of the guns recently, it looked like they'd been busy shooting the ground up. One of them was ranting something powerful about rending the earth asunder with the power of darkness. I don't go in for that sort of thing. The sort of power I trust in is the power of a human wall of swords conducting Operation Charge of the Shite Brigade. Some of the Frenchies tried to act all high and mighty, like they didn't give a shit about how much ownage was tidal waving its way over their poxy capital village. In fact, the charge went so well that we charged pretty much all the way through Paris, killed the nasties, even the stubborn horsemen who had caused me so much trouble along the way. By the end of it all, it was 3 cheers for me and 3 jeers for he, as I'd given Napoleon Bonaparte a roasting on his own home turf. Paris, nay, all of motherfucking France was mine. Oh, hi there, Frenchies, I didn't see you come in. Oh, nice empire you got there, but isn't it missing something? Something any French empire can't go without. It's surely, what's it called? You know, that shitty place that everyone hates. Oh, it's on the tip of my snail slime free tongue. Maybe it's your homeland, you Franceless French fucks. Anyway, so yeah, there were still plenty more Frenchies out there. They had half of Europe still, but that wasn't going to do a damn thing to stop me enjoying my new automatic Sardinian flag launcher while joyriding through their boring ass countryside. I was quite delighted to find out that in Paris itself they had this whole Napoleon museum, and one upside to the whole name steal crime was that it wasn't exactly going to take much to swap that over to being in honour of the real Napoleon. Swapped out all the shitty Brie exhibits for a nice showing of all the props from Quentin Tarantino's movie adaptation of my life, Pulp Fiction. Despite that stellar display, the locals were a little pissed at the change of management, but with the passing of the Like It or Lump It Act of 1808, it was the law that nobody was allowed to give a shit what they thought anyway. Question was, would the no longer actually French Frenchies try to get their shizzle back? Well, long story short, not really. They just lurched all over Europe like it was a Brisbane high street at 3 AM. One thing they did do though was make that Marseille move I've been expecting. Luckily, unlike Paris, Marseille was fortified, giving the band of merry murderers who volunteered to defend it a hefty boost. The enemy had plenty of artillery, so of course they could just blow our forts to bits if they really wanted, but I think the French had already given up on France, so they were really just going through the motions. They shot the ground a fair bit, landed a few shots in front of the fort, to the side of the fort, but the fort itself was not going anywhere. Realising that, I ordered everyone to get inside and break out the sun loungers, since we were going to have to wait for some kind of half-assed infantry attack. Probably had enough time to grind a few levels on Pokemon while we waited. The only distraction from mashing the A button was the enemy's experimental howitzer, a weapon that shot gigantic fireballs that upon closer inspection just bounced off our men, even with a direct hit. I guess they couldn't get the funding for an experiment where they were trying not loading their cannons with burning bog roll. Makes sense though, you can't budget for real scientists and death robots and still leave enough for paying the life insurance on people who just suck fermented onions through a baguette all day. So eventually they came in for a little upper body work on the climbing ropes. Not that they actually needed to, some shitty YouTube prankster had opened half the fort gates to teach people a lesson about the dangers of leaving your doors unlocked when your house is being swarmed with fusiliers. Would have been a disaster if the French had noticed, but luckily the troops that attacked the gate were the 42nd Blind Battalion, and even more luckily, my reinforcements from Sardinia had just arrived to provide ample distraction from the accidental open fort stratagem. Elsewhere, the French were starting to make their presence known, hoisting themselves up for a North Wall brawl that actually threatened to mince my men up. Would be pretty tense if I cared, but remember, even the guys on my side used to be French. This was the Marseille militia, so really it wasn't any issue if they just happened to get sacrificed for the good of their wise and benevolent master. So overall, the strategy was to sweep up all the Frenchies outside the fort using my new arrivals, while inside it was a classic every man for himself free-for-all deathmatch, the prize being a tiny fort full of dead bodies. Not much of a prize to some, but Sards and Frenchies alike were going wild for it. Even the shitty militia units who'd lost most of their men were charging in for more like it was the corpse-looting version of Black Friday. Special offer just for today, 80% off your chance of survival. Don't miss it, you bludgers. Some troops were engaging in a more civilised discourse, by which I mean taking it in turns to try and shoot each other in the head, mostly failing on both sides because those bloody YouTube pranksters had replaced all their gunpowder with coffee, but I had my cav inbound to get the gore flying the good old-fashioned way, so it was all bonza. Later, after the brawl had gone on long enough for me to finally get my Caterpie to level 100, it looked like we'd pushed most of the Darkspawn out of our fort. But some of my cav outside were having a hard time, as the enemy had turned their experimental gunge launcher on them. I told them to hide behind some nearby ruins. Apparently it was some old temple from a long-lost civilization that started in Marseille back when people thought walking around dressed like a poorly installed set of curtains was acceptable. But sometimes you just have to say fuck history, especially when you've travelled back in time to kill the world's most deadly copyright infringer. The problem I had was the enemy guns were guarded by the 400 horsemen of the apocalypse, so I needed to try and distract them with something, some kind of bait, something replaceable yet seemingly important to the course of the battle. Pretty quick I had the worst infantry unit I could find marching at top speed over to the cav convention, while my own cav started a cheeky gun run. It kind of worked, got the infantry into sacrifice mode and made it to the enemy artillery with a load of horses, starting a massive grind, 4 Saudi cavs against 2 Frenchy cavs. Of course, with the French being made of a futuristic alloy of titanium and unobtainium, they weren't doing much, so I had to call it all off. Half the cav died in our attempts to leave, and the sacrificial infantry were well on their way to Earthworm Town. Overall, it seemed like things were getting fucked up all over the place, even though the fort was still the world's most populated Sardinian flag habitat. Now, there's only one way to recover from a failed strategy, according to the military textbooks that most of the officers of the era were reading. Just bloody do it again and see what happens. Decided to give it a go, and it actually worked. More sacrifices were presented and accepted by the horse bots, letting me surround them, plus destroy the last of their guns. Now sure, I got half my men killed doing all this, but if you've got this far while still caring about the lives of Sardinian troops, then I don't know what story you've been listening to. These guys had the brains of a cockroach, and in some cases the face to match. Finally, the Marseille mash came to an end. Another victory for truth and a downer for struth. But don't pull your earplugs out just yet, there are plenty more blasts in the past coming right up. I was about to gather some more ingredients for the world's biggest Frenchman filet, a nutritious superfood full of vitamin FTF. Come back next time and I'll dish you out a bite to soak up the truth grog before you get too wasted to hear the rest. No one's stopping until closing time, you hear? Australian. Australian. Oh yes, this is an Australian accent. Ha-hee-ha, Australian. No, not quite. Ich bin ein Australian. No. Where is it? Oh, top of the morning to you. Welcome to Australia. No. G'day. There it is. Fucking Australia, mates. Right. Episode 10.